I'm Warren Smith with World News Group. The rise of Ted Cruz on the national stage has been nothing short of meteoric. He was the first Hispanic Solicitor General of the state of Texas, and at the time of his appointment to that post in 2003, he was the youngest Solicitor General in the United States. He's argued nearly a dozen cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and written more than 50 Supreme Court briefs. The son of a Cuban immigrant who became a Baptist pastor, Cruz became a favorite of the Tea Party movement and in 2012 defeated the Texas lieutenant governor to win the Republican Party's nomination for the U.S. Senate. He won the general election with more than 56% of the vote. I met with Ted Cruz at his apartment just west of downtown Houston, an apartment with a panoramic view of the city that he shares with his wife Heidi and 2 daughters. I began by asking him how he originally became interested in politics.
I got very involved in a group in Houston, a nonprofit, that was called the Free Enterprise Institute. And what they did is they took high school students and they had us study free market economics. So we would read Milton Friedman and Hayek and von Mises and Bastiat, and we would write a 20-minute memorized speech on free market economics. And then we would tour all around the state speaking about free market economics. And this is as a kid, as 13, 14, 15 years old. The group then formed a spin-off group, and it was called the Constitutional Corroborators. And it was 5 high school students. We spent hundreds of hours studying the Constitution, and we memorized a shortened mnemonic version of the Constitution. And then we toured Texas, and we'd go speak, say, to a big Rotary Club or Kiwanis Club, and while you'd be sitting there having lunch, you'd have 5 high school students. We'd set up easels in the front of the room, and we would write from memory the entire U.S. Constitution in shortened mnemonic.
Can you still do that?
I can't do it all, but I can tell you, for example, TCC, NCC, PCC, Pon, Mama, Ring. And you may ask, what on earth is that?
Exactly. What on earth is that?
That is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Taxes, credit, commerce, naturalization, coinage, counterfeiting, post office, copyright, courts, piracy, army, war, navy, militia, money for militia, Washington, D.C., rules, and necessary and proper. Those are the enumerated powers of Congress. And if it's not in that list, the Constitution doesn't give it to Congress to do.
Because Ted Cruz burst onto the national scene at such a young age, he also had a young and growing family. I asked him if that fact of his life made a difference in his decision to run for high office. I also asked him how his faith informs his thinking.
And I'll tell you, the single hardest part of running for office is the impact on the family. Heidi and I have got 2 little girls. We've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. When I walk out of our home in the morning, and Caroline, our oldest daughter, wraps her arms around my leg and says, "Don't go, Daddy," that breaks your heart. And I spend a lot of time on the road, away from the girls, away from Heidi, and that's really tough. But I'll tell you at the same time that that's why I'm doing it. I don't want to look my daughters in the eyes 20 years from now and tell them they've inherited a country that's gone bankrupt, that we lost the freest, the most prosperous nation in the history of the world, and that I could have done something to help save it. And I didn't. And I stayed home. I didn't enter the fray. I didn't enter the arena because I wasn't willing to sacrifice what it would take. I don't want to have that conversation with my daughters. I was raised in the church, and I came to Christ when I was 8. And, being a Christian, having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior it's an integral part of who I am. I'll tell you something, though, Warren. I think that running for public office puts a particular obligation on a candidate to be very careful with how you talk about faith. Because I think far too many candidates wear their faith on their sleeve. And they stand up and say, "God told me to run." And I'll tell you, my view as a voter, whenever I hear some politician say that, is that's great. When God tells me to vote for you, we'll be on the same page.
Ted Cruz has criticized the Republican Party for being tone deaf in its outreach to Hispanics. I asked him what the Republican Party should be doing differently.
Well, Hispanics are a profoundly conservative community. The values of the Hispanic community are Republican values. If you look at the values that resonate most profoundly in the Hispanic community, they are faith, family, patriotism, and hard work. The problems Republicans have is not our values and not our policies. It's that many Republican candidates don't communicate to the Hispanic community in a way that conveys respect and understanding. It is a problem with the messengers and how they communicate the values rather than the values themselves.
One of the more fascinating aspects of the career of Ted Cruz is his experience before the Supreme Court. I asked him if he was nervous the first time he appeared before the court in 2003, when he was still in his early 30s.
I was 32 at the time. And I spent a great deal of time preparing, hundreds and hundreds of hours, pored over the case law, pored over the record, did 4 moots, and I actually was convinced. I said, you know, you're ready for this, and I was convinced I wasn't nervous. And then the night before I lay down in bed to go to sleep, I didn't sleep a wink. I stared at the ceiling the entire night, and I remember laughing to myself, going, well, maybe you're not quite as calm as you think you are. I will tell you that there is no experience as a lawyer like arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, it is invigorating, it is electrifying. So I'll tell you an anecdote about the court. What I'm wearing now are my argument boots. These particular boots I've worn in just about every oral argument I did as Solicitor General of Texas. Litigators are a superstitious bunch, and I wore these boots for just about every argument, except, I am embarrassed and ashamed to say, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And the reason is my former boss, Chief Justice Rehnquist, was a stickler for attire. He had more than once begun an argument by admonishing counsel, leaning forward and saying, counsel, that color suit you're wearing is inappropriate for an argument at this court. Now, he did not think brown was an appropriate color for anyone to wear at an argument. And I was very close to the Chief Justice, but there was a non-zero chance that if I wore these boots, the argument wouldn't begin with talking about the case. It would begin with the Chief Justice advising me this footwear was not appropriate in the Supreme Court. So much to my deep chagrin and shame, when I argued at the court, I went and pulled out of the dust in my closet wingtips and put them on and went to do the argument. Now, when I was about halfway through my tenure as SG, Chief Justice Rehnquist passed away, and John Roberts became the new Chief Justice. And I've known John Roberts many, many years. He was also a Rehnquist clerk, and so he and I were friends for over a decade before he became Chief Justice. And so I saw him shortly thereafterwards, and I guess I was feeling a little cheeky because I asked him, I said, you know, tell me, Chief, do you have any views on the appropriateness of boots as footwear at oral argument? And John Roberts laughed, and he said, Ted, if you're representing the state of Texas, they're not only appropriate, they are required. And so ever since then, I have worn my argument boots at the court, but it took a special dispensation for the Chief Justice for me to screw up the courage to do so.
That's great. Well, that's a great story. Well, other than the advice for a Texas Solicitor General to make sure he has his argument boots on, what other advice would you have for young people?
You know, I'd say a couple of things. I'd say, number one, follow your passions. Life is too short to spend it doing things you despise, that you don't love. You know, I would say ask yourself, when you wake up in the morning, what are you thinking about? When you go to bed at night, what are you thinking about? What are your passions? What makes you feel alive? I think God gives us passions and as a direction that He wants us to go. And follow your heart. You will be happier, and you'll do a better job if you love what you're doing. And one of the real blessings of growing up in the home I did, with a father that, as a teenager, had been imprisoned and tortured and nearly killed, is you understood from a very young age that having principled men and women in office is how you protect yourself from tyranny. That's what the stakes are. You know, President Reagan famously described America as a shining city on a hill, a beacon of hope and freedom for the world. That is our legacy, and our legacy is in jeopardy right now. And I hope to play a part standing shoulder to shoulder with patriots across Texas and across the country in fighting to restore our nation.
Ted Cruz was sworn in as United States Senator in January of 2013. In a show of confidence from his colleagues, he was appointed Vice Chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. That's a group of the Senate's most conservative members. And it means that even as a freshman, Ted Cruz is likely to have a significant voice on the national stage, one that we'll likely be hearing from for years to come. Reporting for World News Group's New Christian Voices series, I'm Warren Smith.